So I'm gonna first introduce this panel's moderator, Mr. Moses Kemibaro. Please join us on the scene. Followed by Professor Vukosi Marivate. Darlington Akogo. And Alfred Ongere. Welcome. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? I hope you've been enjoying the sessions and you're all AI ready and ML competent. So I'm delighted to introduce our session for this afternoon. Our discussion is going to be on African AI pioneers, charting the course of innovation and impact. My name is Moses Kemibaro, and I'm the moderator of this panel and also the founder and CEO of .Savvy, which is a digital marketing agency based here in Nairobi. And so we're gathered here really to take a deep dive into the transformative role of artificial intelligence in shaping the future of Africa. AI holds the promise of addressing some of our continent's most pressing challenges, from healthcare to agriculture and education and financial services. However, it also presents unique challenges, particularly in the ethical considerations, inclusivity, and sustainable development. So our distinguished panelists today are at the forefront of AI innovation in Africa, driving change and making significant impact in their respective fields. So let's explore together the opportunities, the challenges, and the future trajectory of AI in our continent. Please allow me to introduce our panel for today, starting off with Vukosi Marivate. I hope I've said that right. He's a professor, actually, Vukosi Marivate, an associate professor of computer science at the ABSA UP Chair of Data Science at the University of Pretoria. Vukosi is also pioneering NLP for African languages that is deeply involved in using AI for social impact in the continent. We also have Darlington Akogo, first the global leader in AI and founder of the CEO of the minoHealth AI Labs. His work spans healthcare innovation through AI with notable contributions in radiology and beyond. His leadership in the UN and WHO focus groups is shaping global AI health standards. And lastly, Alfred Ongere, who's the founder and team lead of AI Kenya. Alfred's passion for AI is matched by his efforts in capacity building, ecosystem development, and making AI accessible and understandable across Kenya. So gentlemen, I'd like to start us off by asking you a question, and maybe you can share from your perspective, what are the most critical challenges and opportunities for AI innovation in Africa today? And we'll start off with Vukosi.
Sure, thanks. For me, it's always data. And when I mean data, in this case, it's a lot to do with data governance. So if you're going to think about AI, you're going to have input. That input has to be data. There must be governance that helps us in how do things move from A to B? How does public data become public data and not just be locked in somewhere within government and you can't use it because it can be part of infrastructures that are used by many different people. And on the other side, how then do we get to a point where we have a good view of fair use on the African continent? So for research purposes, you can use data, and then once you know that there might be a commercial thing, there are steps that you can take to then make sure that you get licensing from somebody within those spaces. So yeah, data governance I think is a challenge, and it's also an opportunity because we can come up with a new paths on how governance can be done in these areas.
Thank you so much for that. Darlington, maybe give us your perspective.
Yeah, I think I would say challenges, there's a number of them. I'll highlight funding. So funding is a challenge for a number of reasons. So there's this thing happening where around the whole world, we know the cost of doing AI, but for some reason in Africa, funders pretend they don't know the cost. I wish I had a more diplomatic way of saying this, but I don't. So take, for example, you have AI labs that are raising several hundreds of millions of dollars to develop AI solutions. But in Africa, let's be honest, what is the range of funding? We're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars. but he wants you to build solutions that are globally competitive. Of course, you get occasional funds that are in the millions and stuff like that. So I'm saying this because in the last couple of months, I've been on this crusade where I'm ruining my relationship with funders by telling them they don't fund enough. On one hand, let's acknowledge they don't have, so when I mean funders, I'm not talking about investors only, even though the investor pool fund is super, super small. Even what, like, you know, we praise Kenya. I think yesterday I saw how much funding has been raised in the last 12 months. Mm-hmm. Kenya was leading, actually. It was Kenya first, Nigeria. It's impressive, but all of this is minuscule compared to what is going into, you know, just AI in Paris alone, not to talk about AI in Silicon Valley and stuff like that. Like, Mistral raised how much again? Like half $500 million before they even wrote a single line of code, right? So clearly there's some heavy discrepancy as far as AI in other parts of the world and AI in Africa. And it's not a quality argument. I can tell you for a fact that we've done work in Africa that is globally competitive. So clearly funders look at us different. That's in the investor side. Now, international development agencies, so you're talking about essentially taxpayers or using taxpayers of, you know, countries like Germany, Canada, and the rest. They don't owe African countries any developmental funds. Our government should be doing this, and we acknowledge that. So we are very much grateful that they even do this. But we have to be honest about what we can do with the budgets we have. So essentially, they give tiny funds and then expect you to cure cancers with, you know, AI solutions. It's not realistic. So I think we need to relook at that. But the challenge is also the opportunity in some sense, which is that we have serious problems in Africa. So building AI solutions in Africa is not just a fancy thing. You can actually solve real-world problems with it. That's the opportunity.
All right, thanks for that. Alfred, what about your perspectives?
So I'll piggyback on what they've said, starting with what Darlington has said around funding. It's also an issue of ownership. The organizations that are willing to fund AI the proper way, unfortunately, are from the West. And there's no free lunch at the end of the day. There needs to be an aspect of ownership. So you grapple with the aspect of, do you really want to own this solution you're creating end-to-end, or initiative you're creating end-to-end locally, or will you sort of share the ownership with the other markets? So just what Darlington had said. And then on the issue of data, I would say a key problem is research, and not research from a perspective of educational institutions, but also private institutions. So research and innovation of emerging technologies is not prioritized by most organizations. So even if you're a service provider, you know, kicking in the door and saying, we have this AI solution that we want to provide, there's a lot of skepticism in terms of readiness. So if the organization has not tested the technologies and known the moving bits, it becomes very hard for them to accept and listen to a new service provider that is coming in. Yeah.
But even as we talk about the constraints or the challenges, I mean, would you say, you know, maybe back to you, Darlington, as well, I mean, how do we solve that challenge? How do we close that gap?
In terms of what Darlington said, the reality at the end of the day is building AI is expensive. Building AI at scale is expensive. Doing your own prototype on your machine, proof of concept, that's cheap. But talent is one of the highest costs right now, because the big 5 organizations are here in the continent, and they're tapping all the talent that we have. So it really becomes hard for a startup that is trying to build solution at the same scale and level to get that level of talent. So one solution would be driving more discussions around tech as an avenue of investment, as opposed to the traditional real estate, traditional, you know, industries, and starting to see technology and the digital service industry as one of the main markets to invest in. So the more local investors and the local people who have the amount of funding to give such solutions. The more they understand the capability of these solutions, then the more they'll be able to tap in. And it's very good. Solutions such as OpenAI's ChatGPT are really taking root. So it makes the conversation very simple for some of the different startups, organizations who are trying to raise funds and say, we are trying to build something similar to this. And this is the amount of scale and the amount of opportunity that is there. So this is where you should put your money. So it's constant conversation and educating the local market. Yeah.
Right, Darlington, if you wanted to add something to that.
Yeah, I think, so one step would probably be, we should be honest about the cost. I had a meeting with one of the funding agencies that is very, very active. You know, I won't mention their name. They are very active in the AI space, even the data space. And one thing that was surprising was hearing from the director when, you know, I had mentioned that it costs much more to do this stuff than, you know, they usually budget for. And the person had mentioned they did not know because they got their funding from other sources. And every time they ask them, how much do you think it costs to build AI solution? This is the numbers they submit, and that's why those funding are created. So it means that there's a disconnect because I meet innovators across, you know, Kenya, Uganda, Ghana, and when I ask them, everyone complains that, yeah, they give us tiny budgets and we have to struggle. But then when we all go to funders, they're like, yeah, it's okay, it's enough. So there's, you know, some dishonesty that we need to be. Of course, it's scary to go to someone who is, you don't bite the hand that feeds you. That's like lesson 101. So it's kind of a bit discomforting to go to them and let them know that that's one thing. The other bit is right within the continent itself. So this is connecting more to, you know, equity investment. We can start looking at alternative funds. So right now it's primarily VCs. We all know the story about Sam Altman trying to raise $7 trillion, right? Which is insane. But that kind of money usually will get from sovereign wealth funds. Sovereign wealth funds, we don't have that much active ones in Africa. The ones that are active are definitely not in the trillions, but they could potentially start funding large-scale AI projects. And this is not, you know, something they are doing out of altruism. This is stuff that can super enrich the African continent because this is what is going to happen. There are definitely going to be labs that are going to scale up. And even for us, like we've had investors from literally all over the world reaching out. At some point, we'll take money from whoever is giving us money. If it happens to be, you know, Emiratis, Saudis, or somewhere in the US, we'll take that. But then what that means is that as you scale up, as you grow your business, the reward, at least from the investor angle, goes outside the continent. So if we can have sovereign wealth funds, we can have national funds that are, you know, super funding AI projects, we can grow them and also enrich the continent.
Vukosi, I'd love to hear your take on this as well. This is turning out to be a burning issue.
Sure. Yeah, so outside the university, as I said, I spend some of my week at Lelapa AI. So we are a funded startup working as a research lab, and our first area of work is in natural language processing. So the one part I think is connected to both what Alfred and Darlington said is that local R&D investments are very low. That's one thing. So South Africa at the moment, I think talking to the minister last month, the Minister of Science and Innovation, he said South Africa's spend per GDP on R&D in general, not on AI, is at the moment 0.6%. It used to be at 0.8% before COVID. COVID happened, and then the private sector started pulling money out of R&D. So now it's at 0.6% of GDP of South Africa is spent on R&D. And then, like, you know, again, there's no better way to say this, as Darlington said, once you leave South Africa, that number goes very much close to zero for the rest of the continent. There's not much internal spend, right, that's coming inside of where R&D money is coming from. So that's one, and that has an impact on what the expectations of what's supposed to happen. But it even pales in comparison to the United States, I think, which is at about 3.6% of their GDP is used on R&D, right? So that's why you can talk about, if you're in Silicon Valley, how much money, like, you know, is floating around in R&D in one part. The other one, again, I'm going to use South Africa as an example. I think in South Africa, it was said that at the moment, the private sector is sitting at something like $50 billion in cash. So this is not money that they're investing. This is not money that's being used for operations. It's just sitting in their bank accounts. Right, so if you're thinking of, if Darlington is complaining about how much money, like, just one country, the private sector is sitting on cash reserves that are not being used actively in the market. Right, so before we get to governments, I think governments at the moment it's a very tough time to ask them to put up funds for general, what they might see as risky. Governments are very risk averse. But what about the private sector? What about the big the telcos, the banks, who are printing cash, like literally, at this moment in time, and they're not coming into the space, and in some ways, it's almost an indication that we are not even confident in ourselves. Right, that we can't put money on our own horses here on the continent and see which ones actually make it. And that's a challenge. It has to be converted into something that the private sector comes in. I tend to say the private sector has to make a choice. Invest in R&D or places for people to build R&D, or build your own R&D capacity. One way or another, you have to spend. If you're not spending, then you're not, because you want the ecosystem. If I'm sitting in Nairobi, I want to have that you can interact with a lot of these big organizations who are local, they're Kenyan, that they also have R&D spend and is actually creating a newer kind of level of, of an economy in the city.
Yeah, it seems to me that, it's kind of like a chicken and egg situation, right? I mean, you can't get the benefits if you don't invest. And if the appetite for investment doesn't exist locally, from our own sources, then, the more I read about it, it sounds almost like AI is a zero-sum game. Either you get it or you don't. And the transition and the transformation it's going to enable, if we don't get on the bandwagon now, potentially we're going to fall behind big time. Yeah, so maybe that brings me back to you, Alfred. I'd just like to hear a bit from you in terms of, from an AI Kenya perspective, and maybe, again, tapping into this conversation around the gaps we have. How are you building capacity and competence around, AI-related initiatives within the market in Kenya and the region?
Yes, so for AI Kenya, we have two arms. We have a community arm, which has been the most active, has been running for the past 7 years, and then we have an official commercial stroke consulting arm. So for the community arm, we run different educational and skill building programs that are aimed not only at the technical, but the non-technical audience. So one learning along the way when we were bringing the community is even people who are not software developers or machine learning engineers or data analysts wanted to participate in the conversation around AI. So we crafted different programs that spoke to them, so particularly events. So having show and tell events, having documentary screenings and having discussions around that. And then also having hackathons that people can participate in. And then on the technical side, of course, having hands-on technical workshops that anyone can participate in for free. So a mix of that has really helped. And then apart from that, we have engagement platforms that we allow our community members to easily talk to each other and get assistance on what they're struggling with. On the commercial side, we provide advisory services for organizations. We help organizations hire talent. So in case an organization is trying to fill up a senior data scientist position and that's not getting filled, they come to us. We have a niche community full of data scientists. We are able to help them fill that position. And then, of course, the typical product development around AI and so on. Yeah.
Fantastic. Darlington, from your perspective, how do you see AI transforming healthcare, and more specifically around the area of radiology?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that, could be done as far as AI for health. So yesterday, my session was essentially about AGI for health, or the more common term, the foundational models for health. Essentially, we can build AI systems that can do everything within the healthcare delivery pipeline. So if you say radiology, medical image interpretation, you can have AI systems that can interpret X-ray, CT scans, MRI, and this is not theoretical. This is stuff that, at minoHealth AI Labs, we've been doing for some years now. The value is, I think yesterday, and since yesterday, most of it was on health. It was highlighted that the shortage of clinicians is a major problem, especially in Africa. It's a global challenge. And so AI actually gives us the only capable tool that we can use to address this. Because prior to AI systems, if you attempted to do this, which was funny, what made me end up going into deep learning was not deep learning itself. So when minoHealth started, I was trying to, this funnier version of the story, I'll skip that part, but at some point what I was going for is that whilst the doctor is not available, can you write some, if and else statement, essentially, that's what I was going for. To then ask what is your symptom here, and if you have headache and you are this old and your blood pressure is this, then maybe it's this. You very quickly realize there are infinite conditional statements you can write. There are infinite rules. So unless you have a system that can learn from just pure data, you cannot do this. So AI is actually the first thing that allows us to do any of the. Prior to AI, basically it's a 0 to 1 kind of change when you're using AI within the healthcare sector. So the value is very much clear. At this point, it's mainly just scaling it so that it's everywhere. Right? You want it to not only be in the most expensive hospitals across, the continent. You want it to be that if you go to tiny villages, there's some tiny clinic, and they are also still leveraging AI to save lives, because that's what is very much needed. But then finding a way to do all of that is also sustainable, because that's the thing, right? Usually when we do some of this social impact stuff in Africa, it tends to be purely based on, charity work and stuff like that, and then you always keep relying on grants. It's also not scalable. So factoring in scalability in this, sustainability in this is very important. Yeah.
It's interesting you should mention that, because I think about 3 weeks ago I met a CIO at one of the hospital groups here in Nairobi, and he told me they've put in some AI system, and specifically I think around radiology, so the MRIs and stuff like this. What's amazing is that, first of all, the diagnostic part has gone, I think, down from 25,000 shillings to something like 600 shillings. And then the most interesting part is that, let's say you go into the broken bone, that the AI system will not just identify that, but surfaces potential other illnesses that might be visible within that image, including and even up to identifying abnormal cells. So somebody goes in for a broken leg and then discovers that they could have 2 other issues that need to be looked into. So it's actually better healthcare that they're delivering to their patients. Those are sort of possibilities that, are actually happening today. Yeah. Vukosi, I'll come back to you. From an NLP perspective, and looking at low resource languages in Africa, how do you see AI playing a role in that space?
So as per my talk in the morning is, we, on the side of looking at AI as just one of the enablers to assist in the development of languages, it's a great opportunity now. So we have a very interesting kind of time, and I guess in space, that to get going is actually not as costly, right? You can do things inside a Collaboratory or Google Colab notebook. Yes, you're not going to build the biggest model, but you can do things with very small models with small amounts of data that we couldn't think about 5 years ago. And that now requires more on getting more and more people interested, working with their communities, getting data, building models, testing out, and then being able to report to people. At the same time, we have to really take into account that we have to take with us, as we're building these things, the humanities or the social sciences, right? And this is where I think the things that are going to be very interesting from the African continent in these spaces when these 2 areas get very close to each other. Because we have our history. We have the things that have happened, colonization, but now we can look back and say, how now do we redefine what our languages mean to us, and then how do we also make them active? It is something to preserve, but then it's something else to actually make it that people feel okay using the languages as they were. And we mustn't take into, for granted that we come here, we speak in English, or we're speaking in French, or speaking. So, but we want to get to the point where whether somebody's speaking Swahili, Luo, or whatever, they can just be comfortable, they can express their ideas completely. And that's the power of as we're building natural language processing infrastructure on the continent, that now these borders disappear. Right? People can interact with each other and really express themselves in maximum ways and also bring their knowledge completely. At the moment, you have to then think like, I don't know, I think a lot of Africans is you're translating 2 levels to say something. Right? How do you get to just being, and then through that, just being able to talk? Yeah.
So it sounds to me like there's a profound level of opportunities right there. Just the fact that we can clearly communicate to each other without any interpretation or loss of detail, so to speak.
Yeah. So that's where kind of AI is going to be a part of, like, the grand project that is science. How do we get to know ourselves and our world better? And AI can be one of the drivers in these spaces. Then you can then look, like, on what can you do in health, for example. What can you then be doing for other sectors to assist in these things? It's I think being in a city, I know we're all, like, I'm in Pretoria and Johannesburg, you take for granted that once you leave cities, the way people express themselves is not the way that you're, like, a person in a very urban area is. And how then do we tap into that to really drive the Africa that we want? So using the AU, right? What is that Africa we want? And AI is just one of the pillars, I think, that can assist us a lot in that area.
Fantastic. Alfred, I'd like to come back to you. I mean, you've been very much at the forefront of pushing the AI agenda in Kenya and also the region. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, how are you measuring or able to sort of establish the sort of impact and the results that you've been having as a result of being at the forefront of this effort?
So I'll talk about the direct and indirect. Of course, the direct touch points, we run surveys from time to time. And we ask community members to give us feedback on the impact that we are creating. So most of the time, it's around, of course, upskilling. Many people appreciate that they're upskilling. Many people appreciate that there's a niche site they can go to and to specifically look for AI jobs. And then there's also very good feedback from organizations that are tapping into the community and learning from how other organizations are developing and growing their AI strategy. Indirect touch points, we are very, one of the core focus for us was making sure that we captured the AI story perfectly, not only from a Kenyan perspective, but from an African perspective. So we had a podcast where we were featuring different AI innovators and contributors, not only from Kenya, but from the continent. So whenever we meet people, they tell you how much that means to them. The fact that most people didn't know that there's actually a niche community or a niche space that is contributing towards this subject, and even researchers who are looking for material to highlight in their work, and they use our site and resources as an input into the work they're doing. So most of it that can be measured is felt when people come directly to us and tell us this is how much it means to us. But the reality is, so even before ChatGPT blew up, that's when the spike interest in what AI is. That's when you started feeling the interest that people will be like, okay, so this is why AI is actually is. Yet you've been talking about it for over 6 years, straight from the time when GPTs were introduced to GPT-1, GPT-2, GPT-3. You've been talking about in newsletters. So people appreciate the fact that there's a group somewhere they can go to refer and get sort of technical and specialist insights on different topics.
Yeah, I mean, we have to say, obviously, November 2022 was the tipping point, right? That's when I think AI went into public consciousness with ChatGPT, and now, of course, everyone is here. Darlington, I'd like to hear your point of view around the ethical and regulatory considerations, especially around healthcare, when it comes to AI in Africa.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot on ethics and regulations. Currently, around the world, not even limited to healthcare, there's this, we are not very clear on what is the best framework for regulating AI systems. No one knows the answer. So, EU released their AI Act, and there's a complaint that maybe the EU is trying to be innovative in regulation as opposed to innovation itself. And so for Africa, there's a question of, do we want to be experts in regulations or do we want to be experts in innovation? But then also healthcare is a very different matter. Way before AI systems, if you are going to roll out an AI solution, if you're going to roll out any type of medical solution, that is usually considered a medical device. And there are regulations that you have to follow and abide by. Now, if it's a digital software base, then it's considered software as a medical device. So AI systems are actually categorized as software as medical devices. Within that framework, most of the existing regulations still work. So we got our AI system certified by FDA Ghana, and they just use the software as a medical device, framework they already had. Of course, there are certain key differences. One of them being that pure software as a medical device is more stationary. So once it is approved, what has been clinically evaluated and approved usually stays the same. With AI system, of course, even without you doing anything, you can look at data shifts, you can look covariance drift and all of that. Then also there's the fact that if you get more data and then you further train your model, the performance changes. And so there are all these things. So how do you factor that in with regulators? What we are doing with FDA Ghana is essentially this. In just a matter of months, we send them the new data every time we do any change. So you have to work hand in hand with regulators. And to be honest, the process of getting our AI system certified was not so much regulators saying this is the rules, you follow it. It was more of them also trying to understand how is what you are doing different from the existing framework we have. And so which we are fortunate to have, Ghana has one of the more matured health regulators. It's different in other African countries. There are some African countries that don't even have health regulators. So whether you use AI system in the country or not, there's no law preventing it. And that can be very dangerous. There are scenarios where you have companies just moving from Europe or America because they know the regulations will not allow them to roll out their AI system there. They come in here and just do whatever they want. So, we need to be also watchful of that. There's this one company, I won't mention their name also, they're in Rwanda.
You have a lot of, I won't mention their names, huh?
I'm trying so hard to be diplomatic. I'm failing at it, but, this one company, they came from some European country, moved to Rwanda, made all the noise, raised a bunch of funds. Exactly what happened is they just stuck their tails between their leg and leg because most of what they were doing, it was all just, fluff, right? There's a reason why, I don't know the full details, but at least from my perspective, I think there's a reason why they chose to move all of that in Africa, try it, and when it didn't work, and they go back because there are very little repercussions in that scenario. So we need to be very balanced when it comes to regulations. It's very costly when we open the field that easily, but also we don't want to over-regulate and prevent innovations that can save lives.
Yeah, absolutely. The fine balance between regulation and innovation, right? How do we get the benefits, but again, without letting the floodgates, as it were, open too wide? Coming back to you, Vukosi, Lelapa AI. Tell us about the context within the African space and how that's working.
Sure. So we're a big founding team. We're 6 people who looked at what was happening across the continent. So one, I think the thing that was identified by Alfred there is that through Data Science Africa, through Deep Learning Indaba, you've had, and a lot of our friends and people, even in AMLD, you've had tapped into this huge interest of people in AI, showing them what they could be doing, and people are starting to get master's degrees, PhD degrees in the space, and now they keep on finding themselves, where do I go next? Right, so there's one, try to work for minoHealth, you should. And there might be a few companies, but then given how many young people we have on the continent, and if you just had a fraction of them being interested in working in the AI ecosystem and working especially in research, whether as an engineer or a researcher, that becomes very tough. So we've had this almost like a brain drain because of this. Other people are benefiting, right? The growth, if you're thinking about AI as part of driving economies, the growth rates of Europe and North America aren't enough to actually sustain those economies. So you have to find people coming in from outside. And now the place that is looking like a very good bet is to get the talent from the African continent, right? As Darlington said, the people have very good skills, and then you have that. So on the other side, with some of my co-founders who were people who were there at the beginning of building deep learning Indaba on Masakhane, was how then do we build a new type of research, private research company that can then come in, take as much of this talent as possible, put them under one roof. The name Lelapa is actually Tswana, which is my mother's language, and it means home. All right, so provide them a home on the continent to really look at some of our toughest problems and work on them while they're here, right? And here I mean anywhere on the continent. They don't need to be in South Africa. So that's how we started thinking about Lelapa, and now you have to go through really doing it means going through all the other pains of starting a company, learning how you do raising. I'm an academic, so raising is, it completely goes against you. Like, you have, but you have to learn that. I think we're getting close to 20 full-time people, so you're learning how to do those things. And the first area that we're working on is really in natural language processing, given our background, given the things we're able to do, and we really want to become the trusted partner on the continent when people are thinking of, we want to use language as an infrastructure, right, for our area. And that's where we're trying to get to. And at the same time, you want to be a net positive for the environment. So we are, if you're talking about kind of regulation and policy and biases, you have to be very intentional in the steps that you take. And sometimes that means you go longer routes in places that people think they can take shortcuts. But it's important because we have to be very respectful of the people we're trying to serve and making sure that you protect them as you're building your technologies in that space. So yeah, that's where Lelapa is kind of at the moment. So yeah, if you want to talk language, I'm always willing to talk, and both from the academic research side, but then also if it's also on the kind of more private research or you're needing some work.
Yeah, I love that statement you just made, language as an infrastructure. That's a new one, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Alfred, I'll come back to you again. What do you think are the critical success factors, like what you've done with AI Kenya, building a vibrant AI ecosystem of different stakeholders? What are some of the things that you've seen and found are some of the critical success factors?
I'd say doing the hard things. One of the closing sayings I had last year, and I keep urging the community and the ecosystem, is show me the data or create it. So that means if you can't find the data, don't complain and say there is no data. Be the person to create it, however small or however big it is. So lots of people like doing the talking, and you see in the AI space, most people, especially here in Africa, most people are leaning towards talking about ethics more as opposed to building actual solutions. People are choosing the easy topics to handle as opposed to the hard topics of actually building and sustaining solutions. So we need to be very, very intentional with what we want to achieve at the end of the day, starting from our internal organizations ourselves. So I'm sure by a raise of hand, how many people here who has not used ChatGPT here at work or Perplexity? So I think everyone has used ChatGPT, and that's a good conversation starter at wherever you are to show this is how amazing this solution is making my work to be easier. Why can't we dedicate these resources, whether it is having a development team, having some interns, or supporting an initiative that is trying to build a data set or that is trying to run a hackathon, so that you can amplify the work of whoever is trying to do the work around in AI, so that at the end of the day, you still benefit from that work. whether it's a data set, whether it's a hackathon, whether you need to hire people and so on, or whether you are participating in an investing round. At the end of the day, you benefit. So we actually need to be more intentional, and let's have less of talking about ethics, and let's have more of actually building solutions. Yeah.
So you're saying basically the most important thing is let's do the stuff and not just talk about the stuff.
Let's do the hard things. Let's not celebrate and focus on the easy things, because that's something anyone can talk about. Anyone can wake up right now and say ethics, ChatGPT, I'm putting in my name. Where am I giving ChatGPT my name? Where am I giving Midjourney a face, an image of my face? At the end of the day, if you look at it, there are measures that have been taken in place to handle how your data is being used, and you always have an option of opting out or raising out issues. So the big AI service providers are really working hard to safeguard themselves, especially in these matters of copyright and ethics. And people now should focus more on creating our own solutions and investing in our own solutions.
Great stuff. Darlington, you're involved with some work with the UN, with the World Health Organization around health with AI. What are you seeing there, and how does it sort of cascade into Africa in terms of the implications and impact?
Yeah, so there's this UN group, it's now called the Global Initiative on AI for Health. Essentially, when it started, the goal was to create global standards and regulations for AI for health. But as of last year, it's now to do all things AI, whether regulations or on the application side. I mean, the benefits, so we've had meetings with, health regulators from South Africa, there's also this medical device regulatory forum, which is all African member states belong to, forgotten the name now. So we've had meetings with them, but essentially we created frameworks and then shared it with these countries. Of course, UN member states are sovereign states, so no one has to, by force, adopt what the UN proposes. They look at the recommendations and pick and choose the ones that apply to them. But one key idea, which I don't think that came out from this group and has not even been fully tapped into either on the health side or even any other sector, or broadly the AI space, is this whole space of machine learning auditing. So coming in from the health angle, where evaluation is extremely important. So you run several clinical trials before you get anything out there. If anything, if people building AI solutions, so one, the real world and they all fall apart, is because of the lack of rigorous evaluation. So we built a whole platform that automates machine learning auditing. So essentially, we have hidden test data, and then we have like 100 different evaluation metrics we are using. So everything from, positive predictive value to negative predictive value to, what is it called? Sensitivity, and then specificity, and then a million other F1 score and all of that. We track all of this, and it's done in an automated way. So with some hidden data, you just drop your model, or we give you the test input, and you submit the output. That's one way. We also have this sandbox that we create where the data interact with your model and evaluate it, and we can generate a report. The value here is that we cannot expect every nation to have their health regulatory institution have the capacity to evaluate AI solutions. If you step away from healthcare and you look at, certain spaces like finance, or let's say more sensitive spaces like public security and stuff like that, every nation would not have the capacity to evaluate these solutions internally. But if you can have a machine learning auditing platform, then it allows this to happen. So this is one of the key ideas. But I also want to give shout out to one of the groups that we have right here in Africa, which is the African Union AI Continental Strategy Group, which I believe we are both involved in, right? You've missed a bunch of meetings, by the way. but yeah, so that's a group that has also done phenomenal work when it comes to continental strategy, and somewhere within that strategy to discuss regulation, standard policies, and everything. And so sometime this year, that should go public, and you see very robust ideas as far as how we can grow AI on the continent in healthcare and other sectors.
Oh, thank you very much. Sorry, go ahead.
The draft is out tomorrow.
Oh.
Okay. So maybe my last question to you, Vukosi, is coming back to deep learning in Indaba. It's been pivotal to AI on the continent. And I'm just wondering, what are the next steps when it comes to building a vibrant AI research community in Africa through this?
So one is that I tell people I'm no longer in organizing the yearly meeting. It's got its own set of people you have to let go. People have to run those things. So I'm only a trustee on the strategy of where we are. So the question is apt. So I think there's a couple of things. So the nice thing about building the Indaba, and maybe I'll just call it out here. Like I was asking earlier, I think Darlington, of like how did it be that it was 4 men in the front? We need to be better at that, and I'll take responsibility. I should also pick it up. But the Indaba has been something where we were building a AI and data science community from scratch. So one of the things, again, we talk about intention and inclusiveness. We made sure that, for example, last year, I think in Accra, 800 people, 45% were women. Right? So that is something where it's a very different type of AI conference than anywhere else in the world. So that already is giving lots of different kind of thoughts and how things that people could be interested in on the one side. We've had some conversations, I think, over lunch today. The Indaba, since 2019, when we were here at Jomo Kenyatta, has tried to bring in and say, let's have more Francophone workshops that are connected, because we understand that, again, we are a continent, 54 countries, very complicated. Like, it's not a thing of just one size fits all. Then it was building up sessions for startups, right? Sessions, last year we had the HCI, human computer interaction workshops come in. And these are all starting to build up and they're starting to also start maturing some of these initiatives. So through that, now you have to think about what are the meta structures to allow people to, to literally fly by themselves instead of being tethered necessarily to it's a deep learning Indaba thing. Masakhane is an example of something that completely now is on itself, but there are others. Whether there's Sisonke that is looking at health, there's Roya that is looking at computer vision. So there are these communities that are building up, and they need to build up. But then at the same time, we kind of start noticing that they're going to have the same beats of you're going to start, there's going to be lots of energy at the beginning, then you're going to get into the middle where you've grown and you need to now figure out, oh, we've grown, we can't do the things we did when there was 5 of us. And how do you then capacitate that? So the Indaba will still stay the premier meeting place. Right, you want to, as many people, get there as possible that we can, but then we know that the activities, the work is going to be done by the community around it. All right, and the Indaba has become the place where all these communities, they come and they congregate at the Indaba. We just want to make sure that that space is as welcoming, as innovative, as dynamic as possible. And through that, I talked about the slow earlier. On the back end as trustees, and we're trying to figure out how do you move money around Africa. Like I can tell you, that is literally one of the things that keeps us awake at night, is how do I send money to Algeria? How do I send money? It's a thing that people don't think about because they just think about that's the thing we need to resolve. That's why with the things that we need to do to make sure that at the end, we have these vehicles that can assist people without them having to also deal with some of these other pieces. So yeah, I'm hoping to see as many people as possible who are here apply. I think applications should be open soon to come to the Indaba in Senegal. Data Science Africa registrations are open. Data Science Africa is in Nyeri this year at Dedan University of Technology. And then I think Indaba X Kenya is in Kilifi, beautiful part of Kenya, and it's going to be in July. So all of these are just support the communities. It takes a lot to put the things there, but people being there and also looking around, the other thing, sorry to close, looking around and saying, oh, I can help with that, please do. That reduces a lot of the stress that people have in putting these things together, and the volunteers that are there really make that community. That's what I'm saying. I can be there just to be the person who says I can help, but it's not. I was in Accra last year. I just showed up on a Monday. The amount of volunteers that had been there to make it something that people own, and that's the thing you notice with the Indaba. It's the people who are there own the gathering, and it should be something we're very proud of.
Fantastic. I'm excited. I definitely want to check it out. So I want to ask one last question, and this is literally 1 minute or less. And I think the question I'd like to ask the three of you, starting with you, Alfred, is how can we make sure that the innovators and the policymakers create the right frameworks and approaches around AI to make it as ethical and inclusive for all stakeholders as possible in Africa?
I'd say we have to, I'm assuming most of the people here work in the tech industry. We have to actively participate in conversations around legislation. An example I would give, I think you're aware of the Robotics Society bill, that we had to strongly come together as a community to shut it down and say, this is a bill that doesn't make sense. And that cannot happen if we are working in silos and saying we can't participate in conversations around legislation. So we actively have to set aside time whenever we see an open call for participation by Parliament or whichever government body. You have to create time and go and participate, and they need to hear our voices. Some of them know we exist, some of them don't know we exist, some of them are technologists, but they have their own agendas that they want to push with their lawmakers. So we have to actively participate in the conversation. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Alfred. What about you, Darlington? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with Alfred. I think, we just need to work hand in hand with policymakers and to create the right environment. Policymakers have the mandate, but they do not have the knowledge and expertise, so that's where innovators come in. And to do one last non-diplomatic thing, that's my issue with the crypto sector. Essentially, they've built their whole angle that we are anti-regulation, we fight regulators. No one ever fights regulators and wins. Like even Uber that started that way, they had to get like people who work with the Obama campaign office, the administration, to help dealing with regulators. So for the AI space, let's not even start creating that sense that we are in opposition to regulators. We are friends of regulators and policymakers who continue working with them.
Fantastic. Lastly, Vukosi, your thoughts?
Patience. Working on the policy side requires a very different type of patience. I think also as we come in as technologists, you just think, hey, this makes sense, this is what we're going to do, but it's really having the patience to explain. One of the things you identify when you're working with people who are in policy side is that, as Darlington said, they're not the technical experts. So you need to spend the time explaining the basics, the intuition of what's going on, so that you can then go far. Right? If you just tell them it's magic, it's very hard because now everybody's like, what is it that you're not telling me? Right? What is it that you're hiding? And as such, things become even slower than if you had actually worked on building up the patience. The other one is, the thing I live on is many hands, I think it's a proverb, many hands make light work. All right? Don't go alone. We get these opportunities, we get invited, put out and say, no, there's Darlington who's available as well, maybe you can talk to that person as well. Because what then happens is that when you convene, you have lots of different viewpoints, and we can then tackle places that we're not the thing. It's taken me now probably 2 or 3 years working with legal scholars to get to a point where I kind of understand IP copyright when it comes to data and language on parts of the African continent. Right? But I still won't be comfortable to say I'm supposed to be the one in the room. I'd rather ask for people at Strathmore, people at some of the universities in South Africa to say, no, you come in, you are the expert in these spaces. So being open to just having people who are the skills, it actually makes the working with regulators much easier. Don't be, I am expert of everything. You will burn out. That is one thing you will burn out very quickly and not really get much done.
Great stuff. Alfred, Darlington, Vukosi, thank you so much. You are clearly the AI pioneers on the continent. I think the insights you've shared have been incredibly valuable and thought-provoking. To our audience, thank you so much for joining us for this panel. We do appreciate it. And please join me in giving a hand to our panelists as well.